Welcome to the Executive Coaching Podcast, where executive coach Alicia Cowan will discuss leadership topics and coaching solutions to tackle the most difficult problems that keep you from leading your team to success.
Welcome to episode number 26 of the Executive Coaching Podcast. And today, I am so excited. I previewed this on my last podcast, Kara, that I was going to be bringing on some special guests. And here you are. And so I want to introduce Kara Gaisie. And so the way that I know her is she is my coach. And she and I have known each other for, goodness, 3 years. And has been with me, coaching me through so many different situations. And why I love her so much is she has such great experience. She herself, she's been a CPA. She's a former financial director of a Fortune 100 company, and she's now turned to be a master business alignment coach. And so she shares all of her deep, rich experience within corporate space and now coaches, I would say, hundreds, if not thousands at this point, of leaders, and how she's leveraged her corporate career into becoming now a multiple six-figure life coach. Personally, because you all on this podcast love some personal updates. She lives in Atlanta, Georgia. So she's just a little bit north of me with her husband and her 2 kids, and has got a full, rich life outside of running her own business as well. So we are going to dive right in. So Kara, you and I have talked so much about managing yourself as a leader.
Mm-hmm.
And I would love to kind of hear your perspective. You've been on both sides. You have the lived experience as a senior leader within a big firm. And you've also coached, again, so many leaders that are within the corporate space. And so I think so many times we think that managing other people in our organizations is like the hardest job. I hear that a lot. We think that managing others, but really, truly managing others is like very small in comparison to managing yourself. Because you can't control other people. So like managing yourself and how you're going to approach the situation can help you. But what's your thoughts? What's your core thoughts on this topic?
Yeah. Well, first, thank you for having me. It's such a pleasure to be here with you. Like you said, we go way back, which feels like way back. 3 years in entrepreneur world is a lifetime. But I love this, and I love being here with leaders because actually I miss you all. Entrepreneurship can get lonely at times, especially when you don't have a big team. And I was in corporate working with big teams, and I love that. I love the dynamics of a corporate environment and the ideas that were shared. But you're right, as far as managing your mind and managing yourself within an organization or within you, even your family, right? At home, being able to manage yourself. So I think it's really hard because we are critical of ourselves often. And what I mean by that is that we're judging ourselves. We have since we were kids. And so a lot of times when you aren't meeting your own standards for, how you should speak, how you should lead, you hear a critical voice. And a lot of times we hide from ourselves instead of listening to that voice and understanding it because it's painful, right? That doubt, it triggers a painful emotion inside of ourselves. And so instead of listening to that and feeling into that emotion, it's much easier. And we've been trained, right? It's easier to pick up something, to go to social media, to eat something, to do something else other than understand what we're feeling, why we're feeling it, and then decide who we want to be going forward. So I think that's what makes it hard, is because we're not trained to listen to ourselves so that we can manage ourselves and then effectively manage our teams.
Oh, that's good. That made me think of a couple of different things and tools you've given me. Even when you talk about those inner voices and inner critics, it makes me think about the board of directors, the internal board of directors. And some people don't want to look at that, right? The self. And I think it comes up as labeled as sometimes imposter syndrome. I hear that a lot. Definitely a hot topic.
Yes.
Or insecurity or lack of confidence, comes up as executive presence because I feel, nervous about presenting to leaders.
Yeah.
But a lot of people don't want to look at that, about the negative everything. And
Yes.
I've used this tool of the internal board of directors. We would talk about like, what does that look like when you have that voice?
Mm.
How do you like listen and lean into it? Because I think a lot of people are like, well, what does that even mean? Like, why would we want to listen to that rather than go to just confidence, right? Like, why would we rather not?
Yes.
I don't want to lean into that at all.
Yeah,
Just
I think
something
there's
about
a misconception of what confidence is. A lot of times people think confidence is speaking up, being loud, being the loudest voice in the room or the biggest energy in the room. But confidence a lot of times looks like leaning into those emotions and moving through them and speaking up anyway, having
Yeah.
courage to feel those emotions and not let it stop you. So, with respect to the internal board of directors that's in our minds, often that's other people's voices. That's society's voices. That's our parents' voices. That's the mean people from school's voices,
Yeah.
right? It's not really our truest knowing about ourselves. And so being able to differentiate those voices and understand where they come from. And that's the beauty of working with someone like you, who's a coach, who can help them understand, how long have you been telling yourself this?
Mm.
Because motivational triad, you probably have talked about this
Mm-hmm.
before, is that the brain loves to conserve energy, avoid pain, and seek pleasure. So the reason why we don't tend to lean into those uncomfortable feelings and that discomfort, is because it's painful. And the brain wants to
Yep.
avoid pain and it wants to conserve energy. So if your brain's used to saying, you're not good enough, you're not going to do this right, you shouldn't be in this position. Whatever it's used to saying is going to continue to repeat that because it loves to conserve energy and say the same things. And then there's a cognitive bias as well. So whatever we believe, the brain is going to look at the world through that lens, right? So if you
Yeah.
believe you're not performing well, you're going to notice every time you don't meet your own standards. So part of managing yourself is, first, I think for me, it's looking when I blame other people. It's like, oh, I'm blaming my team not doing what I expect them to do, instead of looking myself and how I didn't set clear expectations, maybe. Right? It's easier for the brain to say it's someone else's fault, because then we don't have to take up the energy and the time to look at ourselves, to feel that discomfort and to understand it, and then to be someone else, right? To do it differently.
Yep. It's so good. And I think that is the risk of not managing yourself well. And
Yes.
exactly that, right? Because we get so much into the mindset of it's not us, right? It's not
Yeah.
us. And we become either aggressive in blaming others, right? And pointing outwards that the circumstance and the other person has to change,
Yes.
or we become a victim where again, it gives our power away. And it's like, again, it's not us. However, we're the victim of the circumstance or what the other person is doing rather than taking accountability. And I call it like emotional or professional maturity, right? To
Mm.
say, yes, they may have showed up or the situation may not be ideal or out of my control, but what do I control in this? And how do I still just decide how to move through it rather than just being the victim or putting the blame on somebody else? And I see this show up so much. I just talking to somebody and coaching them about perpetually wanting to leave the organization and leaving the situation that they're in. And so I see this where people decide like, okay, it's not me. It's this, we use a lot of these phrases of like, this is a toxic environment, right?
Yes.
To blame the circumstance. And rather than changing and growing, and by all means, yes, there are some situations that are absolutely, you should and would advise, yes, get out of, right? If you feel that that's the case. But I think a lot of times people use that as to mislabel it, to blame the circumstance because they don't want to grow or don't want to change, or they don't want to look at what they could be doing differently. And I see that a lot where people just decide like, okay, I'm just going to job hop, right? I'm going to leave the situation. And then they go to the next role and they find
Yes.
themselves be a similar situation. I mean, not the exact situation, but a very similar situation where they're still facing maybe avoiding difficult conversations, or, everyone seems to be an underperformer around them, or, they still find themselves repeating that same situation that they were in because of how they're showing up to that. So I see that play out that way. I think that's a big risk. You don't.
I totally agree with you, because you take your brain and yourself wherever you go.
Yep.
So if you don't understand the problem internally, you'll attract the same situations. I like to look at things outside of the corporate environment sometimes. It's like when you struggle in relationships, a lot of times you habitually attract the same type of partner, right? And the same thing happens inside of corporations in any type of relationship, because you don't do that internal work to say, this is where I could change. This is where I could be a better in a relationship than I'm being. This is where I can be more curious about people instead of judgmental of them. This is where I can be more compassionate about them and what they have going on rather than judgmental. So I think that until we understand what's happening and how we're creating our results and our part in the relationship, we just continue repeating the same things over and over and over again. So I love that you brought that up, which, like you said, ends up job hopping, because you find the next toxic environment or the next toxic person based on your perception.
Yep.
So I agree with that.
It's wild to see.
It is.
Question for you.
Yeah.
You are, again, master life coach. What do you have on tap? What would you say if you wanted to start working on this today? What steps would you advise somebody? Like, how do I even get started on this? Like, what does this even look like? Because I know we get to talk really like high level and theoretical, but what would you advise for somebody to do?
Honestly, I would say to hire a professional coach like Alicia. And it's a great investment, because you'll get to understand yourself so that you can know yourself, you can manage yourself, and you can perform better for yourself and your team. But before you do that, if you want to kind of try this on your own, is to look at your actions. Alicia's probably talked about the model, and it's a tool that we're both trained in. And part of the model is your results come from your actions. So if you have a result of feeling unfulfilled in your work, or angry a lot, or perceiving yourself in an identity that you don't want to have, like an imposter, hire a coach. But before that, you can look at the actions you're taking. So if you're taking certain actions like blaming other people, right? If you're taking actions like complaining, if you're catastrophizing a lot, if you're job hopping, right? If you're taking those actions, that's the first indicator that maybe it may not be the environment. It actually may be me. Maybe it's the environment, but it's an indicator to slow down and think about it. The second thing is notice how you feel. So sometimes you can catch it when you're feeling and before you act, right? So if you're feeling triggered, if you're feeling angry, frustrated, unfulfilled, any disappointment in another person or yourself, notice that vibration in your body, and you can pause and understand how you're thinking, right? Because every emotion we're feeling is based on our perception of our experiences, whatever we're experiencing. And then once you master feeling, you can understand how you're thinking. And some of those perpetual thoughts you're thinking, that's creating some of the same results over and over and over again. So first, look at what you're doing, then notice how you're feeling, and then ultimately knowing how you're thinking, so you can solve for the root cause of what's going on in your life and then your career, and then change it. But again, if you want to do it faster, hire a coach.
Yes, I take that advice very seriously, for sure.
Yes.
That is so, I never thought about it this way until you really said it. And of course, I've heard, the model explained so many different ways, but I think as an executive, it's almost like it's like your dashboard, if you will, or your control panel of your car. You can reverse engineer, like, okay, if I have this symptom, right, of job hopping, or if I have this symptom of like, maybe it's an indicator light that's going off on the engine to say something is going awry here. So do we want to pull over and look under the hood and look at it differently? And to your point, maybe it is the environment, maybe it's not. But to really examine it and to slow down, it's like, but this indicator light's going off. So how do I reverse engineer it? Like this could be a symptom and a warning sign of something more. And just how do I look at it? And I think that's exactly right. Your coach can be in the passenger seat with you as you're driving the car. We pull over together, we take a look at it. Let's take a look and see. So we can get this thing fixed fast, or we can pull over on the side of the road and do it yourself too. That's all
Yes.
do. But I think that's a really good way to explain it, is like, look for these indicators that are showing up in your workplace, in your environment over and over again. What are some of those habits?
Absolutely.
Yeah. I love it.
Yeah.
I love it. So good.
It's so good.
Okay. Anything else that you think senior leaders should just know about managing themselves?
Yeah, I think I would say really getting to know yourself. And that sounds easier, like most things, easier said than done. And what I mean by that is really getting to know your authentic self outside of what you've been conditioned to believe and who you've been conditioned to be. Because once you know yourself, you can then have space to really own it, is what I call it.
Yeah.
And that's really having confidence to say that I'm different, and that's an asset, right? You understand how your differences are assets to you rather than liabilities to you. And you can allow others, you can see others and allow them to be themselves and bring their authentic selves to the team and use it as an asset, right? So once you know yourself and you're in a position of owning who you are as a leader, you can then be an example of that to your team. But if you're in a constant state of judging yourself and not being curious about yourself, but rather just shutting down and judging yourself, you don't grow. And when you don't grow, you're not an example to your team to grow. So I think the best thing to do, know yourself, own it, get really curious and compassionate with yourself so that you can understand yourself, and then offer that as an example to your team.
Ooh, that's so good. So good. Chills. That is it's so tricky to do right now. And I'll say this from, being in this environment of coaching leaders right now.
Yeah.
There is a push, right, for bringing your authentic self, being inclusive of our differences, or in there, that's the messaging, and that's the environment starting to shift within society. But I think the conditioning, what we're seeing in like coaching sessions with clients, it's like we talk about, one of my previous podcasts was around your leadership style. I think it's saying what is truly you showing up to the workplace as a leader? What do you want your style, your brand, your authentic self to be? And it helps being like the North Star of pulling back to, what do I want? What do I want to show up as? And it's like that gravitational pull that you can help even make decisions via this guiding principle in identifying what is your authentic self. I think, but what I find in coaching is like, people are so socialized to like fit within the corporate, right? With the corporate culture, or what they think a leader should look like, what maybe they've been taught, or examples they've seen, role model from other leaders. I think even for myself, like in the past life, you're expected to show up in a way that you think is expected of you, either within that company or from leaders. That's a tough one to pull apart. So you're getting this meta messaging, right? Of like, yes, we're inclusive, be different, show up as authentic self. And then, but within this company or these examples, it's really hard to pull away sometimes and strip back to like, what's really me?
Yeah.
Versus what I think the company wants me to be, or maybe my mentor has told me what's acceptable, or like, right? I think you talk a lot about alignment. So how do you know, right? Because I've worked with leaders that, we identify, like, okay, what do you want your leadership style to be? And they'll pick some, some phrases, and sometimes it's really not in alignment with what they truly are, but it's what they think is expected of them.
Yes.
How do you know if you drop that in? What practical tools do you have? I know you talk a lot about alignment. How would you know? Like, is it me? Is it my authentic self? Or is it like what I think is expected?
Yes. Oh, this is such a great question. Thank you for that. Fascinating to pick apart. I think I start with the company's mission,
Mm,
really understanding what is the mission of the company? What is the company here to do? Who are we here to serve? And even within teams, what is our mission? Right. And
mhm.
really understanding. And for me, it's important, and you can check in for yourself. It's like, is it important for me to be aligned with the mission of this company and of this team? If I'm going to give 40 plus hours of my
Yeah.
time every week to the company's mission, am I in alignment with it? I think starting there and then understanding the vision and the goals for the company and the team as well, and make sure there's alignment there. But I think on an individual level, it's about knowing your values, right? What do
Yep.
you value and what is authentic to you? Again, going back to our familial upbringing, a lot of times we were given our values.
Yep.
We were told, you should value respecting your elders, which I agree with. We should value money. We should value, being with family, whatever it is understanding what is a value that was given to me by
Mhm.
society or by my family or by this team, and what is my truest value inside. And to your point, I think the way we know is to spend time with ourselves.
Yeah.
And some of the ways we don't spend time with ourselves is we're constantly listening to other voices. We're listening to TV shows, we're listening to the news, we're listening to social media, we're listening to all these other voices and their perspective. We're reading books, right? All of these other voices and input. And so we don't get to know our authentic voice and self within ourselves. So if you question, is it me or is it just what society's telling me? Is it what the company's telling me? Turn off the noise. Like practically speaking, and it'll be hard
Right.
because again, your brain is wired to do the same thing over and over again. So if you're
Yeah.
used to listening to social media, to YouTube every single day, and you say, brain, okay, we're going to stop and just listen internally,
Yeah.
that's going to feel uncomfortable maybe. But when you turn off the noise and you listen to yourself for a week or a month, you'll know what's you and what you value and what you want. And then you can compare that to what the company values or the team wants and say, it's aligned, we're a match, we agree on this, or it's not aligned. And I want to offer something different. Or maybe this company isn't the place for me, right? You can make some of those decisions.
Right.
But a lot of times we try to make those decisions from impulse,
Yep.
right? Being triggered rather than truly knowing ourselves and knowing it's a misaligned fit. And it's time to move on and the relationship with the company's complete.
Mm, that's good.
Mm.
We don't get quiet enough in this world, do we? That's so good.
There's so many opportunities to listen that
So
we
good.
don't listen to ourselves often. You're so right. Mm-hmm.
So good. Well, Kara, I feel like I just got coached through this conversation. So thank you. I know this is going to be so valuable to leaders. And I love the fact that you shared so many good points where you can think about it again, high level and theoretical, and then put so many good just things into practice, like things we can all start doing today, just to start thinking about our roles and how we are listening to ourselves, managing ourselves as senior leaders, managing ourselves within our personal lives and that personal space too. And how do we show up representing our own values and what is important to us? Thank you.
So good. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yes, Kara, and she is amazing. She has got her own podcast. It's called Make Money with Alignment, and you can find it on all the major podcast platforms too if you want to dive more into all the world that is Kara. And I appreciate you, and thank you so much for coming. So glad to have this conversation today. All right. Thanks for listening, everybody. Bye.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of the Executive Coaching Podcast with Alicia Cowan. If you're ready to have an executive coach who's ready to help you lead your team to success, then book an introductory call at aliciacowancoaching.com/call.